Welcome back to the Rural Opportunities Podcast. In this episode, I get the pleasure of interviewing Damien Kurek, Member of Parliament for the Battle River Crowfoot region. I get to learn about Damien's start in politics, what got him interested, how he got involved. Rural people understand the importance of politics in their everyday life, and it's a great story of how Damien got started and the people he worked for. We'll also get to learn about what is Damien's focus in Ottawa when he's working, how his committee work, and what areas he really finds important to good governance in Canadian politics. We'll also get to learn about how government really works, and he has some great tips for you on that. So I hope you enjoy our conversation, and I hope it engages you to get more involved in politics in your everyday life.
So today on our Rural Opportunities Podcast, we are delighted and thrilled that he made time out of all his Zoom meetings to have our Member of Parliament for Battle River Crowfoot, Damien Kurek. Damien, welcome.
Good afternoon, Diane. It is great to be with you here, and I'm glad that we were able to make it work. And thanks for your flexibility too. I know that some of my meetings earlier today went a little bit late, but I'm really glad to have the opportunity to virtually sit down with you and talk here today.
Yeah, no, you know what? It is the time, and I know you guys are silly busy right now. Just for viewers that may be seeing this later when we release it, but we actually captured Damien 2 days after the budget, so he's a little busy with caucus meetings, and we sure appreciate you taking the time. So let's jump right into it. Rural Opportunities Podcast is all about rural opportunities, right? Us people here in rural that sometimes Canadians forget about. There's this whole great network of people out doing things, amazing things in rural. So I really wanted to pick your brain about politics in rural, right? Because when we look at representation kind of across Canada, rural seems to get lost a little bit. So I'd love to hear your impressions on that. So I just have some questions we'll run through, but anything I'm not covering, feel free to chime in.
Sounds fantastic. I'm passionate about rural Alberta, rural Canada, so I'm really looking forward to this.
Nice. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get involved in politics?
Yeah, great question. And it really starts before I can remember. I've always been passionate about politics and the idea of government and trying to make life better, solving problems. And from as early as I can remember, I always wanted to try and make a difference. And politics was an opportunity to do that. In fact, I think it was my grade 5 teacher said that I repeated this to me actually when I was running for the nomination for the Conservative Party back prior to the last election. Said, did you know that in grade 5 you said you were going to be in politics one day? You said you were going to be prime minister. Now I'm not going to go that far, I don't think.
Okay.
But I was passionate about politics then, and really one of just the amazing parts of our democratic system is that a teenager from Consort, Alberta is where I grew up, a small town, about 700 people, and a small town kid growing up on a family farm has the opportunity to make a difference. And really when it comes down to it, there's a bit of a story in terms of I did a Lions Club sponsored exchange with a program called Encounters with Canada. And because I was passionate about politics, I called the Prime Minister's office. Now this was just after Stephen Harper was elected, and I was a card carrying Conservative, and I called the Prime Minister's office after hours because of the time change.
Yes.
And I said, Mr. Prime Minister, I'd really like to meet with you. I left him my Conservative Party membership number and said, I'll be in Ottawa this week, and I'd really like to meet with you. Well, it was a couple of weeks later, I get called down to the office at school. I was about 15 years old. And my dad's on the phone, and of course you're always a little worried when your parents are calling and you get called down to the office. But my dad said, well, the Prime Minister's office just called. I almost fell out of my chair when the Prime Minister's office showed up on the call display, and it turns out they're going to make something work. And
that's amazing.
So at about age 15, shortly after Harper was elected Prime Minister, during the Remembrance Day themed week at the Encounters with Canada program, I
Okay.
had the opportunity to both spend a week in Ottawa, which was incredible, and especially it was one of my first times on an airplane, and a
Yeah.
rural kid. This was pretty exciting. But I got to meet with the Prime Minister of Canada and my local MP at the time, who ended up being my predecessor, Kevin Sorensen. And after and for the political nerd I was, this was a little bit like meeting Wayne Gretzky, right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
and as I'm walking out of the room, Kevin Sorensen at the time said, "Damien, you're a young guy. I can tell you're passionate about politics. Why don't you come to one of our EDA board meetings, the local Conservative Party board meetings?" And I said, "Oh,
Okay.
that'd be awesome." And so I got a ride with a, a fellow from the community that was also on this board, and I started showing up, and over the next number of years, I ended up getting elected to that board at age 16. Started going to conventions, and really just pursued that to the point where about 15 years after that really pivotal meeting,
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to run for a nomination and see my name on the ballot, and ultimately be successful. And I tell that story because it's the way that I got to where I am, but it's also
Yeah.
speaks to what our democracy is, and how as a 15-year-old from Concert, Alberta,
Right.
or whatever your story is, you have the opportunity to make a difference in this country. And especially from rural, that doesn't mean that you don't have a voice, even though we have challenges here.
Yes.
It's
We
there's
always have a voice.
yeah, and so that that's kind of the story, and
I love
that's
that story.
yeah.
15 on a plane to Ottawa, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did the Terry Fox program,
Okay,
but
okay,
similar. So originally I'm from Killarney, Manitoba, which nobody knows where that
okay.
is,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
5,000 people, southern Manitoba, grew up on a farm, and I got
yeah,
selected to go to Terry Fox in
yeah.
Ottawa. It is life-changing, isn't it?
It is. Yeah,
Right? So
yeah,
how amazing. So did that influence, college decisions and what you were
yeah,
taking and
yeah, yeah. So after high school, my faith has always been very, very important to me. So I actually went to Bible college right out
yeah,
of high school, and I spent a couple of years there. And then actually, I was offered a job to work at that college for a couple of years, where I also met my now wife. And then
amazing.
it was that point I knew I wanted to officially study politics. So kind of as as my wife was was finishing up, and we were looking at kind of next steps, we decided, well, before kids come along, we should probably get this degree out of the way. So I ended
Yeah,
up going to school in BC, and then did an internship actually, and what ended up being 2015, spent a number of months in Ottawa again, working
right.
on the 2015 federal budget, which ended up being being Stephen Harper's last, but got to really experience the life of a staffer and whatnot. And then I graduated later that spring, but decided at the time that it was an opportunity a good opportunity to come back to Alberta. Ended up being the right decision. As political staff, you either have a job or don't, depends
That's right.
on who wins the election. So we ended up making the right choice in hindsight. But came back to Alberta, was putting the crop in that spring, and thinking that I'll put the crop in, and then I'll apply for a job in Edmonton
Right.
or something like that. Well, for a young conservative, that's the year that the NDP got elected. So
Oh,
so there
wow.
weren't many new political jobs in
Yeah,
Alberta. And then obviously later that year, that's when the Trudeau Liberals got elected for the first time. So certainly there was limited opportunities, but I had a really the opportunity throughout my political involvement to engage and network with folks from across Canada. And a friend of mine was actually working for Brad Wall at the legislature
yeah,
in Saskatchewan. And
okay.
at the time, as I was sitting on the tractor, kind of dejected that the NDP had won provincially, I get this phone call and say, "Hey, would you be interested in applying for a job at the legislature working for Brad Wall?" And I thought
Great.
that'd be great. And so long story short, a couple of interviews later, having to skirt around the question whether or not I was a Rough Riders fan,
Yeah.
I ended up getting hired there and spent just under 2.5 years working for the government there, and it was neat because you got to see really a government with a focus on recovery. There
Yeah.
was a lot of tough decades for
Mhm.
that province, and I saw that through passion and hard work and really empowering people. And that's the thing that I love most about and still respect Bradwell a lot, is that he always believed in people so much. And
Okay.
and in his case, it was seeing that the people of Saskatchewan could accomplish great things. And after
Mm.
so many years of kind of just being around that million population mark, not really having a growing economy, a lot of kids, in fact, you would hear often how the grad gift, the typical grad gift for a kid in the province of Saskatchewan, was to get furniture or to get luggage so that they could go somewhere else.
I
So
got that in Manitoba.
yeah. And it was Bradwell's passion to see that attitude change, that
I love
empowering people to do what's best, to really just create opportunities and unleash the potential that's there. Just sometimes you have to search for it. So over my about 2.5 years there, really saw how that could be implemented in terms of public policy and just an attitude that really shifted a province.
Yeah.
And then after that point, and of course that it helped to have both studied politics, but also I added a communications element
Perfect.
to my degree as well, to make sure that I not only knew about politics, but knew how to make sure that people understood that I knew about politics.
Exactly.
But then in 2018, my predecessor had offered me had I'd stayed in touch with Kevin Sorensen from that meeting back in 2006,
Sure.
and he had a position in his office here, and said, Damien, I think you'd be a good fit. And plus, I know you want to get back to the farm a little more. An 8-hour
Yeah.
commute to Concert to put in the crop in the spring and the fall is a little bit long. So come work for me in Camrose, and then you can spend a little more time on the farm. And I did that for a little while, and then Kevin obviously announced that he wouldn't run again, and the rest is history. So
And the rest is, how long did it take you to decide to run for the seat?
yeah. So it's interesting because I'd always wanted to run for office, and had been asked a couple of times. I'd been
Okay.
asked here provincially years ago when I was just out of high school, and in Saskatchewan as well, but never felt that it was the right opportunity, because it's a huge commitment, and it's a decade plus one to commit to running in a nomination, and then an election, and then working towards trying to accomplish the thing. So I'd felt that it wasn't the right timing the two previous times, but when this opportunity came along as a bit of a shock. I'd kind of expected that I'd have a few more years in order to be able to make sure I had a few more savings and that sort of thing. But
Right. Get ready for it.
yeah, so I knew that I wanted to do it, but I needed to make sure that my family was on board. So
Right.
so a long conversation with my wife Danielle, and we decided that it was the right time. And then politics is really not about one person. It's about building a coalition of support. And I started making some calls, and it was
Mhm.
very encouraging to have a wide cross section of support. And there was about 300 people between when I first started considering it and then to the point where I actually made the announcement that yes, I was going to do it. There's about 300 people that actually reached out and said, Damien, we think you'd be a good option for this. So it was building that support, seeing that
Mhm.
there was a vision to ensure that rural has a consistent voice in our capital, and to ensure that those things that I had learned both in my my life growing up in a small town, my education, my working for Brad Wall, for Kevin Sorensen, that all of that would create a platform to really fight for Battle River Crowfoot, this 53,000 square kilometers of beautiful East Central
Yeah.
Alberta, and over the last almost a year and a half, it's been a true honor to be able to do that, even though the overall election didn't necessarily turn out the way that we had hoped.
Right.
It's been an honor to be able to still bring those concerns forward.
Yeah, definitely. What a story, hey? So what a background, great background for member of parliament. You've seen it all. And I really love the fact that you've worked, and lived in some different provinces, because I think that's important too, to serve as a member of Parliament of Canada, is that you understand the full Canadian picture, not just, you're bringing your priorities forward, or the priorities of Battle River Crowfoot, but you have a good understanding of all Canada, right? So that's important. So let's talk about the priorities for Battle River Crowfoot. Right? What are the priorities that you see for Battle River Crowfoot? And I guess, what are you out in Ottawa, shaking hands, kissing babies, and making sure people listen to these priorities?
So it's interesting because shaking hands and kissing babies was pre-COVID.
Right. Let's just go make that clear, Damien.
So it's but no. So I there's really two primary areas of focus. One is ensuring that I'm a strong voice for this region, and a lot of that comes through ensuring that there's something that I call a rural lens to public policy, and that rural lens really looks different depending on the issue, but it could be as simple as a small community that looks at a grant opportunity, and as a example, if there's a $1 billion grant that's meant to be spread across the country, you're going to have cities like Edmonton and Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, with lawyers and accountants that can fill out complicated grant applications, do environmental reviews and studies, and what could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But then you have a community like Amisk, for example, a little over 100 people, where they're having to, in some cases, access that same pot of money, but don't have accountants and lawyers just at their disposal. So a lot of my focus has been making sure that there's that rural lens to say, look at, there's those programs in major population centers, and all of those, hundreds of steps, that's fair. But when it comes to rural Canada, making sure that rural Canadians have the same opportunities that their urban counterparts do, things have to be scaled accordingly, so that, the one staff member in the office in Amisk can access these programs as well. And I know for even the city of Camrose, they're dealing with, they're kind of on that big enough to have to apply for some of the bigger grants, but they're not a big city, and it's a very similar challenges that exist there. So rural needs that voice to ensure that those questions are being asked, and that understanding that there's, even just the fact that it's about 5 hours from corner to corner of the area that I represent. So when a government employee says, well, can you pop into Edmonton for something? It's like, well, no, it's not really feasible, right? And just ensuring that is heard. And then specifically, I call them my legacy industries, ag and energy, need strong voices these days, and especially with the challenges in the energy industry. And look, it was one of those days that no politician ever wants to experience. But when the Keystone XL pipeline, there was about 1,000 pink slips handed off in this constituency, right? And to make sure that those people know that I'm fighting for them, and that they have a voice in the capital. And it's the same thing with egg, and especially some of the evolving issues with supply chains
Yeah.
and disruptions, and making sure that there's access to markets. And you had there's canola that's doing pretty well right now, and my dad is very happy about that.
Okay.
But also, it was only a little over a year ago when a lot of farmers were very concerned because of not being able to access markets in China,
Yeah.
and canola was in many cases less than $9 a bushel,
Yeah.
and it's making sure that those dynamics are heard in Ottawa. So that's kind
Yeah.
of the number one part. The number two
Okay.
part of what I'm really passionate about is the concept of good governance.
Okay.
And it's kind of a geeky term, but it really comes down to making the right decision no matter what the consequences. And it's really not super political, but it's
Right.
rather taking a series of circumstances and just ensuring that you are doing what's best, making the right decisions, ensuring that there's accountability, responsible governance, and that there's effective oversight. All of those factors, and from the perspective of being in the official opposition, it looks obviously different from being in government, but
Right.
just making sure that I'm doing what I can to ensure that both my constituents and our nation have the accountability that is constitutionally set out in our constitution, and what Canadians expect. Because if Canadians can't trust their government, then there's a big problem. Now,
Oh, bless them.
uh, and politicians is certainly not a trustworthy career, but it's important to work diligently to ensure that the Canadians' voices are heard, and that's something that I endeavor to do each and every day. And some days, it seems like you move the ball, to use a sports kind of an analogy, you move the ball a few yards down the field. Other days it feels like you're kind of stuck, but
Yeah.
hopefully we're able to keep moving things in the right direction.
Well, and governance is so important,
Yeah.
regardless, even from a government point of view, but every nonprofit, every charity, right? A good understanding of governance, and your board's a good understanding. Maybe it's not the House Commons, but even those volunteers that are dedicated to serve on boards, right? And do they have a good understanding of good governance and how their decisions affect things that could happen potentially years, right? Years
Yeah.
in the future. So I love that you're carrying that flag and you're pushing for that, because I think that's definitely one of the weaknesses sometimes we deal with, right? So,
Yeah.
see, and
Yeah.
he's already waving.
Yeah.
Look, he's always working, this Damien, right? So how are you keeping
Oh,
engaged with your
yeah.
electorate during
Yeah.
COVID?
Yeah. So it's certainly been a challenge.
Yeah.
Generally, a rural politician's weekend and evenings are just filled with miles on the road, getting here and there and everywhere. But with COVID, we've seen a dramatic change. So there's been a lot more of this, a lot
Right.
more of Zoom conversations, and it's been interesting because there's also been events, for example, that I would have never been able to attend prior to, because they were generally during a sitting week, and when you're in Ottawa, there's just not that ability. So it's been interesting. A lot of Zoom and in video. There's, I don't know, the myriad of platforms. I've
Right.
lost count of the number of different types of video applications now on my desktop. But a lot of that, a lot of being on the phone. Social media has become a big part of it as well, and it's
Yeah.
trying to balance that as well, because often social media is hyper partisan, and if you look at my account, there's certainly a lot of that, but it's also trying to inform and be issues based as well, and trying to find that right balance. And then there's traditional ways, whether it's picking up the phone,
Yeah.
whether it's still showing up. In fact, just yesterday, I went and visited a food truck that was a new business startup. A lady had lost her job back in January, but didn't want to sit around, so started a farm to table food truck idea. And I went out and visited her her yesterday and had some fantastic food as well, so that's a bonus. But
Yeah.
just to see that sort of thing, so you still have the opportunity. And then too, there's you've probably gotten my flyers in the mail and different things like that. And I did a teletown hall that had about 20,000 people that answered and at least started the call, and then it dwindled as the
Right.
hour went on. But just trying to use, there's kind of a whole toolbox, and you try to utilize them the best possible. And then too, on that front, making sure that on the parliamentary side that I'm able to still bring the concerns of Battle River Crowfoot to Ottawa. So whether that's joining virtually like I am this week, or still going to Ottawa when possible. And I'm on the public safety
Yes. Committee. Yeah.
committee, so it's there's a lot of work being done there as well. So trying to ensure that all of those things are balanced. But there's really been, I think, a change, that there's been a blending of constituency and Ottawa because of more virtual, and
Right.
that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now,
Agreed.
I think as things get back to normal, certainly the physical presence thing will kind of go back to quote unquote normal. But
Yeah.
being able to utilize things like this is valuable, and certainly tools that maybe weren't as accessible prior to
Yeah.
COVID. So
Right. And have you seen your engagement numbers go up or down because
yeah.
you're trying all these new things?
Well, being a new politician, it's tough to judge that, because
Right.
I'm
Yes.
hopefully growing engagement and like my Facebook likes and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
what I did really find, and this is a little bit of a shout, or a public service announcement to all of your listeners, is an MP's office serves really two main functions. One is the political, legislative, and being a representative part. But then there's
Okay.
the practical side, and me as your MP is really the face of government here, and it's ensuring that the Canadians, and in this case the folks in Battle River Crowfoot and around Camrose, have the opportunity to be served by government. So most people will file their taxes without problem, or apply for CERB
Yeah.
or EI or CPP or whatever the case is, passports. But if there's ever a problem, your MP's office is a great place to turn to say, okay, I'm having a problem with this federal government program. What could I do? And often we can assist with that. And over the
Okay.
last year and a bit, we've seen such a demand for things like the CERB and whatnot. My staff and I have kept very, very busy with connecting and helping make sure that constituents have the resources that are available. And two, we're local people. We're not a call center in
Right.
a large urban area. We understand that it's a 2-hour drive or 3-hour drive. So there's been times where we've actually dropped a form in the mail with a return on envelope, so that they can fill it out and send it back to us, and we can help them. So it's really about serving people, and that's really what politics is about. So whether
Yeah.
it's on the politics and representing, or just the practical, making sure that folks, that even if they don't know where to turn, and
Right.
sometimes I'm the first number that you Google, so we get all kinds of questions, and we can either assist, or we can at least help direct people to where they need to go, whether that's the province or local seniors programs, whatever the case is. It's really an honor to be able to help people in a very practical way like that.
Well, and I think, it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because I think people forget that about a member of Parliament's office, is
Yeah.
that you are there to assist them. So I'm glad you
Yeah.
did that shout out for people, so people, realize, yeah, it's not just, I don't have to go in there, and if I like or dislike a policy or something,
Yeah.
talk about that. But if I need help, you guys are there to help. So
Yeah.
that's a great reminder. I don't have you for much longer, but I want to get this issue in.
Yeah.
Rural internet.
Mhm.
You're a farmer, okay? You understand the challenges of rural internet. CRE has taken this on, is that one of our causes is, come on, like when are we going to make this a utility? And especially for those of us in ag,
Yeah.
you know, so much of the automation of equipment and data that farmers are using now, or
Yeah.
producers, it relies on the internet. What's
Yeah.
the solution here? Like, how do
Yeah.
we get this thing going?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. No, I get that asked a lot, and there's a group of us from rural Canada that are really focused on ensuring that rural lens gets applied to this policy, and there's a whole bunch of examples that I could give about, where money is spent, and for example, there's a small town that money was spent, a massive government grant. In fact, there was a big announcement, and the minister showed up and whatnot, but the fiber line went to the outskirts of the community and then stopped.
Yeah.
And although it's great to have internet to that point, but for any large provider, there was just no market incentive to actually put the work in to ensure. So a couple years later, after that investment was done, people in that community that had that massive grant and whatnot, they still don't have predictable, reliable broadband. And or I often hear from that farmer or that group of farmers a couple miles on the road where it's a dead zone, and it seems like nothing, no matter what you try, can
Yes.
can can get there. And that's where programs have to be responsive to the demands of the unique circumstances, so that whether it's a small town or that farm that just has not been able to get that point-to-point service, whatever the case is, to ensure that there's programs that are responsive. And in some cases it'll be pretty easy. It's about connecting a community with a service provider, and maybe there needs to be an incentive to ensure that gets done. Or it's that very specific example that may be fairly resource intensive to get that one rural route connected, but it's making sure that there's there's my wife and kids are at the front door, I see. So
See? Everyone, come
just
on, Dad.
yeah,
Personal line. You deserve some of that.
just
I love
she
it.
obviously doesn't know that I'm on a call. So
And that's
uh,
fine.
can you said this was being recorded? Can we just pause it for just a
Of
second?
course. Start this again. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's about making sure that ultimately Canadians get connected, and I think especially what we've seen with the evolving nature of work during
Yep.
COVID is that there's a demand for both internet service, but also a change in what one's office environment looks like. And I think that provides a interesting change for a lot of people that would have normally had to have been connected to an urban center. Now all of a sudden they can choose to move back, whether it's a family farm or small town, and they can choose to work from really anywhere.
Yeah.
But the key there is predictable, reliable broadband.
Right.
And so that's something. There's an ongoing dialogue with the government. There's a suite of programs that are available now, some of which are working okay, some of which have changed and are working better than they were when they were launched, and
Okay.
some and there's still work that does need to be done. And then there's the kind of the new tech side of things. So whether it's Starlink or 5G, where you see latency almost eliminated from the connections that normally would have been really limiting. There's that ability to ensure that that's not just a downtown core that has that, but
Right.
to ensure that rural and egg based or in fact energy as well is a big part of it. So you can detect
Yeah.
pipeline leaks and whatever the case is. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity and growth that's coming, and a lot of what our focus has been is ensuring that rural Canada, rural Alberta, and specifically Battle River Crowfoot does not miss out on that. And I find it really, really interesting. in this constituency, there's 2 highways that had pretty significant broadband investment back in 2005, 2006 with Alberta
Huh?
SuperNet. So there's Highway 12 and Highway 9 has fiber optic capacity, and we have seen those 2 corridors become really a hub for a whole host of opportunities. Schools were and local governments, businesses, they've all been able to really jump on that. So when investment is done strategically, you can have massive payoff, and that's certainly what we're
Yeah.
looking for as we ensure that this hyper connected world that we see, and a lot of that is through things like this, but a lot of it is also through whether it's the autonomous tractors that I start seeing videos of, or
I know,
whatever the
right?
case is, right? Like there's so much opportunity, and we don't want to
Totally.
miss out of that because our bandwidth isn't quite enough.
Agreed. No, and I'm glad it's a priority, and I
Yeah,
definitely, we see more of this coming from Ottawa,
yeah,
that this is becoming a priority. So that's great news,
yeah,
because I think rural could actually face a resurgence if we
yeah,
had it, and that excites me, right?
yeah,
Because I think a lot of people grow up rural, go to the city, kind of don't like it, want to
yeah,
come back, but
yeah,
right. So I'm hoping this new way of working has opened people's eyes. Okay, I'll do
yeah,
one more, or one and a
yeah.
half more, and
Sure.
then I'll go let you be with your family.
Yeah, no
So
problem.
one of the things that we often see,
Yeah,
is this: the media likes to portray this deep polarization
yeah,
of, political, I'm this political party and you're
yeah,
that, and we never talk. That's
yeah,
not reality. I don't think. And
yeah,
so we want to just clear the air on that. So
yeah.
maybe talk about a little of kind of the across the aisle work that you're part of in Ottawa, and how you find that experience, and the good things that are coming out of that.
Yeah. So whenever somebody comes to the capital, and
Yeah.
of course, because of COVID, this looks very, very different. So now when I give this example, I tell people, whenever you want to learn about government, there's 2 things you have to do, but you
Okay.
cannot do one without the other. And
Okay.
that's, you have to watch Question Period.
Yes.
And you'll see the throes of political debate and partisan rhetoric and all of these other things, and that's an important part of our parliamentary process, and the fact that uh, especially in fact, American presidents have commented on how that would terrify them to have to go be asked questions each and every day. It's a very,
Okay.
very cool part of our democracy, and certainly I often, both in the questions that I ask, but also just the being involved in the process, express a lot of that passionate frustration, making sure that these local interests are represented. But I tell people, you cannot do that without doing the second thing, and that's watching committee proceedings.
Right.
Now, generally, when you see committee proceedings on the news, it's that few moments of really partisan work,
Right.
or inflammatory something. But
Yeah.
really, most of it is very, very calm, back and forth, engaging. And the neat thing is that you see um, what is normally around a table, and of course now it's a virtual table, but it's the opportunity to engage and to work towards something that is in the best interests of all Canadians, and that includes if you disagree. So
Right.
so I, I may have a bill or an issue that is being studied, and I may be voting against that, but I can still make sure that folks from here and their perspectives are heard, to make
Right.
sure that those good governance questions are being asked and hopefully answered, and to ensure that that happens is very, very important. And even though in the end I still may vote against it, it's that breaking down of that polarization that is so key, and especially during a time like with Zoom, with social media and whatnot, where the 10-second soundbite just is what's required to get clicks, to get views,
Yeah.
whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And I do encourage people to in fact, when I talk to people, whether it's about other politicians or even when people talk to me, it's like, look, we're all just people, and
Right.
in most cases, we are trying to do what we think is best and
That's
working
right.
hard to ensure that gets accomplished. And we can disagree on the policy. We can have a debate about what a certain path forward should look like, but the key is making sure that dialogue exists. And I'm often troubled at how divisive, especially when it comes to things like social media and
I know.
Twitter and Facebook, and especially algorithms. I will quite often get phone calls from people say, well, everybody on Facebook says this. and and it's true that that's how it looks, but to and even in some cases I've explained how algorithms work and say, well, the reality is there's a wide divergence of 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 perspectives on this, whatever the case is. And that's why Parliament specifically is so important. There is only one place in this country where every square kilometer of this great diverse country is represented, and
Yeah.
that's the House of Commons.
Yeah.
And it's important for that to function so that those perspectives and that diversity of opinions can be heard. And especially at a time where there's sentiments of alienation and whatever the case is, there's these growing divides. It's so important that voices are heard, that there's effective discourse, and
Yeah.
that it's not just the partisan shots that get the airtime. And
Agreed.
and it's not to say that can't be part of it, but that's not the whole story. And it's
Right.
making sure that you're working diligently to actually try and solve problems. And so like I said, when you really want to either visit the Capitol or if you're wanting to learn more about government, you can't watch Question Period without watching the monotony and boring nature of a committee, because that shows the two opposite sides of the spectrum. And I've even when it comes to things that can be controversial, like the energy industry,
Yeah.
I've sat down with NDP and Liberals that have we don't agree on a lot when it comes to the specific policies, but I share with them why I'm passionate about the issues that I am, why pipelines
Yeah.
matter, why big agriculture is not necessarily the enemy, and
Right.
at the end of those conversations, I don't expect them to somehow be converted to a conservative, but it's great to be able to have that honest dialogue, so that at the end of the day you can say, okay, we may disagree, but I respect where that colleague is coming from, and I know they respect where I'm coming from, and that allows us to at least treat the issues with more humanity.
Love that. I love that. And it is such a great story. I've been at both actually in person, and right.
Good.
I love that story. Social media, please, people, if you haven't watched Social Dilemma, please do.
Yeah.
Right, because it is all algorithms, and I want us to get back to, it seems we forgot there's a middle, and somewhere we can disagree, but we can still move it forward. Right. And it just gets better the more we all work on it. So I love
Very
that.
true.
Oh, I love that. Okay, last question. What are you farming this year?
Yeah, so last year I had the opportunity, because everything was virtual. I had the opportunity to spend more time than I expected on the tractor and combine. This year, I hope to some. A lot of it depends on kind of how things go, and I'll tell you, elections are not don't really overlap well with seeding and harvest. But when I have a few days or a weekend, I still go to try and haul some grain or spray or something like that, because it's a nice change of pace, and I just love that ability to get behind the wheel of the truck or the tractor and just kind of change pace and remind me kind of at the foundation of it all that there's dirt underneath your fingernails. And so I try to as much as I can, but being a member of Parliament is very much a full-time job. So it's certainly busy there, but there's been a few times where I've been able to zoom into meetings from speakerphone in the tractor cab, and
Awesome.
and it certainly as there's beeping in the background. In fact, I called a constituent at one point. This was I think Friday evening, I was spending a couple of days on the combine, and a constituent had asked me to call them back, so I called them and I said, just to let you know, I'm kind of driving right now, so if I'm a little bit distracted, just to I'll but as the combine was beeping, he's like, "Hey, you drive that kind of combine, don't you?"
Yeah.
So it's an honor to be able to still be involved. I am the fifth generation, and my kids are the sixth to be able to work the land. Now, the benefit of getting involved in politics young is that my dad is still fairly young, so he and my uncle are the primary operators on our family farm. Right south of Concert. So if you've been to Concert before, if you look south, that's kind of where the farm starts. But so it's a great opportunity for me to still be there when I can. But at the same time, Dad has it pretty much under control. And although I still give him my opinion on occasion, it's he is a good operator, and I have a 16-year-old brother that is pretty excited about being able to do things like drive a combine. So
of course, isn't that exciting? Well, Damien, first of all, I want to say thank you for your service. It is a huge commitment, what you've undertaken, but it's obvious you're passionate about it. And I think myself and all the constituencies of Battle River Crowfoot we're so lucky to have somebody like you there fighting for us. So thank you for your service. And then thank you for your time. Like I said, I know it's crazy busy, but I sure appreciated getting the chance to have this discussion today. And I hope maybe we can have more in the future.
That sounds great, Diane, and thank you for this opportunity. And as issues come up, make sure to reach out, because I'd be happy to jump on the podcast again, and look forward to being able to continue this conversation as we go forward, and hopefully meet in person here as soon as COVID is in that rearview mirror. So thank you so much for this, and for all the work that you do, and those at the CRE. There's a lot of good work happening there, and really appreciate that. And
we can't wait to host your next banquet. I'm just going to tell you now.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to the Rural Opportunities Podcast, where we talk about all things rural. This podcast is put on by the Camrose Regional Exhibition. We are an agriculture society, and we are community builders. We have a long, rich history of rural, community, and agriculture involvement. CRE believes in the power of rural communities and that they are vital to the prosperity of our province and beyond. On this podcast, we talk about rural opportunities and challenges and have conversations with the movers and shakers of rural. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe on YouTube or follow us on whatever podcast channel you're listening to.